Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this tutorial video where I'm going to continue to work on my new Khorne demon army. Now, I got this paint scheme, the basics of it, from War Hipster, so if any of you have never heard of that channel, he's got some really great tutorials. I've changed it a bit because I didn't have all the paints that he had, and so I had to make some adjustments. But we start off priming it black because a lot of this model is black rather than the red I did for that blood letter. But the first thing we want to do is block in some of the major color of the skin. Now, you can pretty much paint the entire model except the top of the head and the fur coming off the back, but everything else, you're going to paint over it with a purple. He painted his in contrast and then used a contrast, kind of a magenta purple. Since I didn't have that, I used the purple here instead, and you'll have to give it 2 or 3 coats. Even though it's a base coat, it does take a bit to cover up all that black. And the crazy thing is we're then going to undo a lot of that in just a minute. But believe me, in the end, it looks really good. So the first thing we want to do is kind of tinge the flesh a little bit more red, because Khorne's red, not purple, but the dogs look a little bit more purpley than red. So starting off using that blood shade, it's the same one I used when I was painting the blood letter. It won't turn it into a dark red, but you'll see now it's got a slightly redder tinge to it. And we're still going to add a few more layers of paint on top. So in the end, it will have a really kind of cool purple blood red look to it. Now here's the tricky part, because we have to do a little bit of blending or fading or whatever you want to call it. So get yourself some black Templar contrast. You want the paint to be very, very wet so you can work with it. Now the head, that's nice and easy because we do want a sharp line that separates the purple from the black. So we get the top of his head, we get the nose, we get the muzzle, no problem there. The trick now is the rest. So starting from the tail, for example, paint black and about halfway up the tail with the black. Then, as quick as possible, you want to rinse off your brush, and while the paint is still wet, you want to now kind of blend and fade it out into the purple. Now you can see here I don't do too good of a job because I didn't have enough paint on there that was wet, and all I'm doing is like ruining it. So I have to go back and forth and back and forth. But you see the basic idea here. Now this was the first time I ever did it, which is why it didn't turn out so well. But on the other side, I do a much better job. So there's the black, wash out the brush, and then using a brush that's not soaking wet but has a little bit of water in it, you fade the purple into the black, and voila. Rub off the little excess there. Now you've got a nice transition of the black into the purple. And it looks like the tail is just gently fading in color. You're going to do the exact same thing on any area that has those blisters. So the shoulders, the back, and the parts of the legs and the rest of the limbs. Put on a blob of the paint, rinse out your brush, make sure your brush bristles are still wet, and then just kind of stipple or dab along the edge and let the water do the blending for you. It'll take time, but eventually you'll get it. I mean, there were, 20 of these dogs in the starter box? No, 10 of them. And believe me, I messed up a lot of them before I got even some that even looked partially good with the blend. But now you've got that cool effect of the black and the skin blending together. So now we're going to move on, and even where you had little areas where maybe the blend wasn't so good, this next step will help cover that up. So using Flesh Terrors Red and Contrast Medium in a 1-to-1 ratio, we're now going to not wash the entire model, but large parts of it to give it more of a bloody look, of a blood-soaked look. So we're going to get most of it, not the area between the spines here on the face. We're going to leave that area because we're going to paint that kind of a fleshy pink. And we're not going to paint it directly on the center of any area that we painted black. What we're going to do is use this paint anywhere where there's still purple showing and anywhere where the purple kind of transitions into the black. And this red, kind of a thick wash, will help pull all of the colors together and make everything look like it just flows from one color into the next. as you can see, it looks pretty darn good. Now, if you're just going for a tabletop standard with the flesh, you could stop there. If you want to add some highlights and some detail, make it a little bit more interesting, get yourself a Wazdaka red or a lighter red and just touch up edges like cheekbones, the top parts of the spines here, just to give it a little bit more definition. It's always cool to me to see how just adding a little strip of paint, a little dot of paint here or there can have such a difference. So now it's got a little bit more depth to it. We're going to add one more layer of highlighting here to really make the skin colors pop. So our edge highlight is going to be Cadian flesh tone. And here, very sparing. This is a very strong paint or color in comparison to what else we're doing. So just tips of the spines, edges of the cheekbone, just dots on the knuckles of the claws, all those kinds of things. Very, very sparing, but adds a lot of character. Okay, so now let's paint those strips or those layers of skin that are between the spines coming out of the side of his head. So pink Khorne will blend in very nicely with the red around it. And you don't want to paint the whole thing solid. Leave a little bit between each of those layers of skin there to give yourself a nice natural shadow. Then we're going to go back to that Cadian flesh tone and edge highlight the areas we just did with pink Khorne. So this will help tie them in with the rest of the spine, like the highlights on the spines and the flesh, and really make the fan around the head here stand out that much more. So the next step is to add some highlighting to the black areas like the hair, the shoulders, the tail. So get yourself a mid-tone gray and dry brush. You could layer, take a little bit longer, you'd get more definition, but the focus of this model is the skin. So I didn't pay as much attention to doing the hair. Now, when you're dry brushing the shoulders, be very light so that you only get paint on the blisters and don't accidentally paint over the muscles. Now, when it came to the head and the face, there you'd actually paint it on a little bit more directly. You're not going to be able to dry brush as easily. Plus, you want those facial features to stick out a bit more. So the edge of the nose and so on and so forth. And then just like with the bloodletter, we use any kind of very strong bone color for the teeth. We're going to use the fang or a bluish purple, maybe a bluish gray color for the tongue. And I should have done the tongue before I did the teeth. Had to be very careful. And then, of course, last of all, we're going to have to touch up the claws, the rocks, everything else that got paint on it while we were doing the rest of the model. But we're 90% done here, folks. The only thing left is a little bit of yellow for the eyes and some brass on the collar. I also used brass on this mark on the back of his leg. You could do it a blood red or maybe like an actual fleshy brand color, but I went with the brass because it sticks out a bit. Then using the same technique for the base, only using a lot more of the Morden Earth Crackle paint, and I got a much better effect. I think that looks absolutely fantastic. So big kudos to War Hipster for giving me the general idea, and I just kind of ran with it from there. So let me know what you guys think. This was a little trickier than the bloodletter, but it was definitely good enough.